Welcome to the Prado Museum. We're here again a few moments before it opens to the public with our weekly session in English on the social media programming. As you know, this is a project supported by American Friends of the Prado Museum. We're a U.S. nonprofit to support and help everyone learn about this great museum. And we do this always in collaboration with our sister institution in Spain, the Fundación Amigos del Museo del Prado. So we hope you will find out about both of us, and we thank all of you who are already amigos or friends. We're here today in this beautiful room on the map. It's room 82, and it's filled with these beautiful Flemish still lives, and we're here with a special occasion with Alejandro Vergara, the senior curator for Flemish painting, and we have news of these new studies.
That's right. Yeah. You know, the reason why we're doing this, thank you, Cristina, and thank you, Bernardo, and all of you. The reason why we're doing this today is because of the recent publication of a book on Clara Peeters, who is one of the leading women painters of the early 17th century. She was a still life specialist. We have 4 paintings by her, which means more than any other museum or institution in the world. And I wrote a book on her that has just been published by Lund Humphreys Press in collaboration with the Museo del Prado. And the US edition is the same book, but the US edition is published by Getty Publications. And we're using this moment as an excuse or a reason to focus on Clara Peeters and her art.
And her such beautiful, exquisite
Beautiful paintings,
works.
Absolutely, yeah. It's interesting that we have 4. 2 of these were already in the Spanish Royal Collection in the mid-17th century, Most of the Prado, as all of you know, comes from the Royal Collection. But let's focus a bit on her. We don't know that much about her. She signs her first painting in 1607. Still lifes were a very new thing. The first still lifes in Europe are painted in Italy, France, Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, about 1595, 1600. We have a 1602 Sanchez Cotan still life in the Prado. These are just a little bit later, 1611. She paints an earlier painting than these in 1607. It shows that she's still learning, still a bit awkward and foreshortening in shapes. By this time, 1611, she's a fantastic painter. Great thing about these works, look at these, Bernardo, look at these little reflected self-portraits, these little light spots that you see on this pewter flagoon. These are tiny little reflected self-portraits, some of them upside down. This seems to imply that we are seeing an artist who wants to show herself, which reminds us of the fact that women painters had very little visibility. It's very unusual to see that.
How would she become an artist? I mean, so there's so few.
We don't know hardly anything about her, but there are very few, but some could paint and some wanted to paint. You weren't allowed in the guild if you were a woman. You weren't allowed to do many things at the time out in the public sphere, so to speak. But women, we know, did tend to market stalls. They did help their husbands doing different chores. Women painters, in the cases where we do know their biographies, were often either aristocrats, and therefore they were freer than others, or they were daughters of artists, and therefore they could be trained at home. Okay. We don't know in her case, we just don't know that much about her.
What about the exquisite objects? You know,
that's really what I find almost most fun, is understanding the peculiar beauty of these artists. Look at what Bernardo's showing us now. Look at the color matching in this picture with these beautiful shells, the object of elite collecting. They're all shells that come from out of Europe, from exotic oceans. Look at the combination of the red of the shells and the birds with the head of the bird, of the big duck there, placed on the basket. Almost everything that we see here is an expensive export from another nation into Europe. This is red wine that probably comes from the south of Europe. It's in a Venetian style glass made by an Italian family that had migrated to Antwerp, which is where these paintings were made. But this is someone showing off high class. These paintings were made to hang in kind of high class kitchens in Antwerp first, but then all around Europe at the time. And therefore everything that's shown in it is something that implies high class. This is a bit more visible perhaps in a painting on the other side, but let me show you something here, Bernardo, also. One of these seems like someone's been at the table, someone just kind of chewed on this pretzel. There is also, one of the goals of these paintings is to be realistic, and one way of being realistic is to paint well, volume, foreshortening, to make things look like as if you were looking at a real thing, but also the sense that someone was just here. You're just moved away from the table. If you look at another one of her works, which is the cover of one of these two books, here notice the fact that we have, for example, this tablecloth. The tablecloth has been ironed, and they're kind of showing off that this is the kind of product that comes from a carefully tended household. We have olives here on the right. Olives come from the south of Europe also. We have a plate made of China, imported from China in the late 16th century. It's lost some of its blue color because of the materials used to paint it, but it's still a fancy import into Europe and Antwerp. We have a fancy silver knife with the name of Clara Peeters inscribed on one of the sides. Again, she seems to want to be present in the painting. She's not reflected anywhere in this work, but her name is on the side of a knife. These knives we know were either wedding gifts, or also knives were taken by guests at a dinner or a party because people would eat with their hands at the time. They didn't use forks. And it's a reminder of a different culture. It's great fun to look at material culture, we call it, at things that remind us of a time when things were otherwise.
So we would come with our own wonderful silver knife to a very fancy banquet, and we would show up with our knife.
That's right, and a knife was therefore like part of your outfit or your car. You wanted to show off if you had a fancy one. We have salt here. Salt was very expensive. It remained so until the 19th century. Words like salary, the Latin root of salary comes from sal, or salt. People were paid with salt. That's why salt was placed on fancy silver objects such as this one, or fancy salt cellars. We have a gilt cup, probably also from Italy. We have oranges coming from the south of Europe as well. She's also beautiful, I find, in her, her choice of formal echoes. I always find when I look at this painting, I think that she's thinking in terms of a pie. This is probably a poultry or a fish pie, and it has this kind of jagged contour, and that contrasts with the oval shape of the plate on which it is resting, or of the gilt cup in the background. So you have this contrast of shapes, which again is repeated in the olives versus the china plate here. You have what's ready for dinner, say, is game, the kind of food that you would identify with aristocrats or with very upper class people who owned land and who therefore could hunt in their own land. Look up here also, Bernardo, Christina, this one's interesting. She's somewhat of a pioneer. Remember, I just said she's second generation, which is pretty early on in the history of still lives. These are 1611 paintings. She's the first painter that we know painted fish still lives. And we may now think that's not so important, but think of a time when the market there's a lot of demand for new types of paintings, and painters are coming up with new products. For example, some while ago, before this was painted, painters came up with landscape paintings. Still life paintings in themselves are a new thing. Painters think of a new subject matter they can paint. And within the genre of still lifes, people are thinking, what can I paint on a table or as a still life? This is the first fish still life that we know of in Europe. Others may appear in the future, but this is the first one. She includes fish in about 10 of her 20-something known paintings. So it's rather typical of her to be thinking in terms of new things, to have somewhat of a pioneering spirit. Interesting also here that she's painting freshwater fish for the most part.
Right.
And that has to do with how fish were brought to the markets in barrels and kept fresh. And fish captured in the ocean would tend to rot, and therefore they were less fancy or less fresh and less expensive. One thing I noticed, trying to, when I worked on her and wrote these books, since we know so little about her, you're always trying to figure out what kind of a personality was she, or what kind of a woman was she. And so that's, I think, behind the sense of formal echoes, of the novelty of its subject matter, of being a still life painter when that's a new thing. I also think she was extremely careful. almost fastidious.
Yeah.
It's interesting that if you look at the strainer here, and you look at it very close, and it's full of these little holes for the water to come through. If you look at that very close and with time, you notice that she's moving them back and forth. She's repainting them to create the kind of final shape that she's looking for. And that's very telling of how this woman is so careful. There's one of the fish here on the right, this one here. Also, if you all could see this as closely as we can, you could see that she's changed the position of that eye just barely. She's just moved it down by a couple of millimeters to make it look more convincing, to create the sense of foreshortening, of recession into space. So that she moves that just by a millimeter or two is very telling again of how extremely careful she is. And again, I go back to the beginning. Remember that these paintings were in the Spanish Royal Collection in the 17th century already. And that means very high end. That's the greatest collection of paintings in Europe at the time. So she's painting for a very high end market. I don't know how much time we have, but let me say one more thing and then.
Okay.
It was very hard for women to be in the job market, say, and to paint. We have about 1,300 paintings in the Flemish collection alone at the Prado. Only 6 of them are by women. 4 by Clara Peeters, and 2 by a less interesting, less skilled, I would say, still life painter also from Antwerp. So these 4 pictures that we have in this room are really kind of exceptional and important. Sometimes I worry about how we've displayed them here, or I have, with another painting in between them. But this is important for other reasons. So don't be kind of misguided by the fact that in this room you find another very large painting in between these 4 great works by Clara Peeters. They're extremely important within our collection.
And she's so talented. I mean, it's just exquisite painting.
Yeah.
Finest detail.
Yeah. I think, again, an interesting thing when I was working on these books was trying to figure out her evolution and her training, and we just don't have enough information. But by 1607, she's rather awkward in her first signed and dated painting, and by this time, 1611, she is close to perfection. So, she must have been in her maybe mid-20s already by this time when she's reaching this level of accomplishment. Hard to know.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Christina. It's a great chance
today.
And again, remember this Prado and Lund Humphreys publication of this book on her in English only, and the U.S. edition by Getty Publications.
And thank you for helping it make it easier for us to learn more about her.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for being with us today, and we'll see you again next week.